Hello everybody, welcome back once again to Brothers in Air. Got the Flashpup here sitting in front of me, and it's bright and early in the morning. I got my vest on because it's a little chilly down here, and you'll have to excuse me if I pause at times to take a sip of my coffee because, like I said, it's early and I'm just getting geared up here, so probably be a little bit of coffee sipping going on because I love my coffee, especially in the morning. So like I said, excuse me. But anyway, today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to disassemble the bolt action of the Flashpup. And for purposes of maintenance and cleaning, and I'm also going to take a little bit of time and show you how I lubricate the action of the Flashpup specifically, but also generally any PCP that I have. This is how I lubricate, especially my hammer. So I'm going to share that with you. And you know, I'm not a professional air gun guy. You know, I'm just a guy that loves air guns, and you know, I want to share what works for me. There's been a lot of trial and error along the way, and so I think, you know, some people will find some of this stuff useful, and hopefully, you know, there's no right way. There definitely would be some wrong ways, but you know, I'm not saying that my way is the right way or the only way. I just want to share how I do it and explain to you a little bit why I do it that way. And hopefully, once we get this thing opened up, we can also talk a little bit about the internals and how things are working. And how they operate and function, so that you can get a better understanding of what's going on inside the Flashpup. But really, once you do this type of stuff and you get up into your gun, you know, that's the best way, really, honestly, to really get an understanding and to learn and see what's going on. So don't be intimidated. There's very good liability reasons why the manufacturer gives you very little information when it comes to maintenance and working on your own air gun. And that's because, you know, things can happen. You're going to ruin the gun, or you could get hurt. So you definitely always want to be safe and make sure that you are thinking of your own safety and others first and foremost. And then always keeping in mind your air gun too. You know, you don't want to screw up your gun. So now that that's out of the way, you know, and it would be nice if they would, you know, share a lot of this information, but they just can't, you know, for liability reasons. And obviously, any time that you work on your air gun or do anything with your air gun, you assume all the risk and responsibilities of everything that happens. You know, I can't be held responsible, nor them or anybody, you know, so you want to make sure that you take it slow and you know what you're doing so that you don't screw things up, you know, because if you call them up and you call customer service and tell them, you know, my gun was leaking and, you know, I went to change a seal and I just got this thing all screwed up, you know, or something. And they're just going to laugh at you and tell you that you voided your warranty and you should have left your air gun in the hands of somebody that was, you know, licensed or had the, you know, the credentials or whatever. So, but these things are very simple, very, very maintenanceable. And the cleaning and maintenance part of your air rifle can extend the life of your air rifle, you know, immensely. With some care and some maintenance and stuff like that, a little TLC, these PCP air guns can last a very, very long time. And if you're knowledgeable and you can do some repairs yourself and stuff like that, if you've got a leaky O-ring or a seal or something, you know, that's not holding air anymore, and that rubber has degraded enough that it's no longer you know, good and doing what it's supposed to. You don't have to be sitting there not able to shoot, not able to use your gun. This stuff is really simple, but you always just have to be safe and do some research and you know, make sure that you know what you're doing and what you're getting into. You know, don't bite off more than you can chew. So before I ramble on too much about that crap, let's just get right into it. Now, this here is an exploded parts view of the HATSAN Flashpup. And this lists every single part contained inside the pup and its part number used and referenced by HATSAN USA. So if you ever need to order parts or whatever, this is what you're going to need. You know, you're going to need to tell them what parts you need and what the part numbers are. And not only that, even if you're not going to work on your gun or tear into it all or anything, and you're just going to shoot it, it's still a good idea to have this. You know, you can really get a better understanding of what's going on inside your air gun and the parts and pieces contained therein. And especially when working on it, you know, especially if it's your first time or your first time getting into a certain gun or whatever, this is a great tool for referencing, because you know, you can see, and a lot of this shows you the actual order of things, the way that they're put together and stuff like that. So it's great. I'll put a link in the description, and hopefully you can just go in the description, click on it, get right on the page, and you know, click on the HATSAN Flashpup and just download the PDF, and then you got it, and you have it for your own purposes and needs. But yeah, awesome thing to have, awesome thing to look at, even if you just pull it up on your computer and take a look at it. Just because knowing your gun inside and out is going to make you a better air gunner. It just will. You're going to be more proficient with your air guns. And, you know, it's just a good idea to know and have a better understanding of what's happening inside of here. You know, not that you're just loading a pellet and pulling the trigger and out it comes. And by learning more about your air gun, you also gain more of a respect for it, you know, and more of a mindset for safety and things like that, you know, because high pressure air is very dangerous, you know, and it could in fact kill you or someone else. So just always be careful. Now the first thing is that when I clean the action of the gun, or I open up the action and take the pieces and the parts out, I don't degas the Flashpup. I don't see any reason to. I'm not saying that you shouldn't, but I don't. I feel that it's a safe thing to do with gas in the cylinder, and I don't see any potential accidents or dangers happening. But like I said, whenever you're doing stuff with your air gun, just use common sense and really think about what you're doing and make sure that you're being safe first and foremost. And so obviously I know that there's no projectile in the breech. There's no way that this thing can shoot and throw anything out the barrel because there's nothing in it. And so let's tear into this thing before I start talking too much. Okay, so obviously it's a bolt action and it's open a little bit, right? We've got the bolt in the bolt handle, and we got to be able to cock the gun. So obviously we've got an opening here, and stuff's going to get in there, especially if you hunt. I've been out on hunts this fall and stuff where the pollens and everything were so bad, and I was trucking through an open field or something, you know, chest deep in weeds and flowers and things, and that orange and yellow pollen, you know, it just kicks up off everything in the air. And I got home, you know, obviously I continued with my hunt and stuff like that. But I get home and open this thing up, and even down on the bottom side of the hammer, I've even got some orange pollen and stuff just from shooting and working the action during my hunt. You know, it just worked its way down in there. So very, very good to know how to clean this stuff and open it up and put it all back together and stuff like that. And you can also do this and maintain your same exact tune. You know, nothing has to change as far as your hammer strike and your velocities go and things like that. So that's also a really good thing. All right, so the first thing you're going to want to do when you're going to open this thing up for the action, there's two screws that hold the stock on. One's right here in front of the trigger guard, and it's recessed about 1 inch. So you've either got to, if you use one of these style, you know, with an insert driver, you're going to need an extended insert, you know, like the 1-inch-long ones, because otherwise the shank of this thing, the part that holds the inserts, the diameter of it is too large and it's not going to fit inside the hole. So I just thought I would mention that, because otherwise you're going to scratch this hole all up and jack it all up trying to get down in there. So you're going to need a number 2 Phillips. That's the size of the Phillips head that is on these screws. And like I said, there's one right in front of the trigger guard, recessed about 1 inch. And there's one also right here in the back of the gun, right in front of the trigger assembly adjustments and things like that. And that one's not really recessed much at all, so you can just get to it, you know, easily. But anyways, the first thing you want to do is pop these screws out of here. Now, a lot of people, I have a tipped in gun vise, and I don't really like using it. When I work on my PCP air guns, I just like a nice flat surface, and it just, I feel like it's just open, you know, and I can just quickly move the gun around and stuff like that. You know, you always want to have a clean surface, and you know, make sure that you're not, I got a little pad up under here just to cushion things, you know, so that when I'm working on my gun, it's not up against any type of hard surface or anything like that. But anyhow, if you know, use a vise or a gun vise or whatever, that's cool. But in case anybody wants to know, that's why I'm not using it. I just don't prefer it, and I find it easier just to work on an open surface like this, and also have air, so it's real easy to kind of blow things off and make sure that there's no fuzz or lint or dust or anything getting on anything while I'm reassembling. So this just works really well for me. But anyways, the number 2 Phillips, and the first thing you're going to want to do is take these 2 stock screws out. And once you get this rear one up far enough, you don't have to twist it all the way out with the driver. You can just grab it with your hand, twist it on out. And I like these things, man. It's like for an office or something, you know, like a guy at an office job would have, so he can put his, whatever, man, I don't know, pens, pencils, paper clips, you know, his little thing of white out, who knows. But I love these things, you know. It's like $5 for this thing. I got it at Walmart in the office section, and it just works great when you're working on your air gun. It's compartmentalized, and, you know, it's just a real nice, clean place to put the parts and the screws and things. And it's, like I said, it's compartmentalized, so you can divide it up, you know, and place things in there according to where they came out of the gun, or different, you know, parts of the gun or whatever. So it works well for me. But, you know, I like it too, then you don't lose anything. You don't want to lose any of this stuff and be hunting to replace a screw or a nut or something like that. So let's get that back screw in there. Now, like I said, this front screw is recessed about 1 inch. So you're going to need a driver with a shank thin enough to get down in there and reach whatever it is you're using. Otherwise, you're going to jack up that hole on the sides. And what I do is just thread this one out till I feel the thread jumping. You know, you can feel it's all the way out and the thread is skipping every time you make a full revolution. So then I know that it's all the way loose. Now, anytime you pick the gun up, you don't forget that you've loosened the screws and the stock is actually not attached anymore, you know, because you don't want to lose one or the other and drop part of it or something. So hold it together like I'm holding it together now, or it would just come right apart. So I'm going to hold it together and flip it over. And now just a couple little shakes or whatever, you should be able to get that screw right out of there. So this front screw is a little longer, and like I said, a couple shakes, it should drop right out of there. And now, when you take the gun out of the stock, you're just going to lift it straight up and out, and you know, make sure that you're not cocking it or binding it at all or whatever, and just lift it straight up and on and out, and it'll come right up out of there. Just like that. So I'm going to set the stock to the side here. Now, just like in the top here, this plastic barrel band, it has a little slot and it contains a nut, and that's how the front screw in the optics rail is secured down, and the plastic barrel band holds that nut. Well, the same thing goes for the bottom here. This trigger assembly here on the bottom, there's a slot here in the front of it, just like up here on this part, and that also has a nut, and that front screw that holds on your stock actually threads into that nut, and the nut is secured in this little slot here so that it can't spin, and that's how that front stock screw is tightened down and fixed down into there. So also, you know, you want to just probably get that out of there. You just give the gun a little jiggle, and at least it'll start showing itself, you know, and grab a hold of it and just pull it out and get it to the side so you don't lose it. You don't want it to go shooting off and you can't find it or something like that. And if you're handling the gun around enough, eventually it's going to work its way out and fall out, even if it doesn't just fall right out initially. So now we got the gun out of the stock, and you can see that the way that the trigger is assembled and accomplished with the shorter bullpup stock and the configuration, there's a rear trigger assembly here. And this contains the lever that catches into the groove on the bottom of your hammer so that when you cock the gun, that hammer lever grabs onto the hammer and holds it in place in the cocked position. And then there's a little metal sear in here, and that is what holds it all in place. And then when you pull the trigger, this linkage is pushed backwards and it releases that sear, and then that hammer lever lets go and your hammer flies forward and you know, smacks the valve. So that's how that is. And this here, this front trigger assembly section here, that doesn't contain anything except the safety mechanism and the trigger blade. And the trigger blade is actually just attached to the linkage here, and that's how it you know, it fires when you pull the trigger and disengages the sear back here. So anytime that I got the gun out, I don't want to handle it and be gripping all on it all over the place with this. You know, when this is in the stock and it's down in there screwed in tight, there's no pressure or anything on any of this. You know, this is all just free in there, and this is plastic, and this is a metal, you know, this linkage is just a metal shaft that's threaded on both ends. But anyways, if you start squeezing on this, you know, and handling your gun every which way and stuff, you could break something in here. You know, maybe something break, maybe you cause something to have a little bit of wiggle or play that wasn't there before or something like that. Just because none of this was ever intended to have any external pressure or stress on it in any direction. So depending on what I'm doing, usually the first thing I will do is take this off. And we've got to do that anyhow, because like I said, that lever in the rear trigger assembly, that hammer lever that grabs the hammer and holds it in place when you cock the gun, that's in the way. You wouldn't be able to get the hammer out and past that because it's in the way. So this has got to come out anyways, and it's actually the first step in the process of disassembling the action of the gun and getting this stuff up and out of here. So that's the first thing that we need to do. And if you look, there's a couple pins going through the breech block. Just a couple little pins, you know, almost like a nail, and it's tapered and pointed on one end like a nail, and you know, then it's just flat on the other side. And you know, these things are directional. They go in this way, so when you pound them out, you got to flip the gun over and pound them out the opposite direction. You don't want to push them even further and try to force them all the way through there the same way that they were put in. You want to reverse them out, and then when you put them back in, just go in the same direction, and you just pound them in and flush them off with the breech block again, just like how it is here on this side. So the first thing we need to do, actually I lied kind of, I misinformed you. The first thing we need to do is take off this the handle, the bolt handle for cocking the gun. So just release it out of its fixed position in the front slot, you know, so it jumps back just a little bit there. And what this is it's keyed to a 3mm Allen key. And so all you've got to do is stick it down inside of there, and the whole entire thing acts as a screw essentially. It's threaded on the end, and you just thread it out. So I thought that this was worth a mention. I have both of these sets of Allen wrenches. I've got this kind here, and then I've got the classic you know, L-shaped Allen wrench like this. A lot of these ones like this, they've got this little ball on the end. This little ball makes very little contact with the sides of the hex, you know, in the head of the screw that you're trying to tighten or loosen. So I don't generally like to use the ball end of these when I'm tightening down stuff or loosening stuff down. If I'm just getting something in, you know, and spinning, then it's fine. But you can strip out the head, you know, that hex head on there a lot easier with this ball than you would with the classic L shape, you know, because it doesn't have that like that, them small little faces on it. It's going to get surface contact all the way around it, you know, and be all the way down in there and making contact completely all the way around, which will give you a better, you know, fit and grab into that hex head so that you don't strip it. So like I said, I don't like to use these. And if you do, just make sure that you're keeping things really straight. You know, you don't want to cock it at all, because as soon as you cock this in there, it's going to be making even less contact. And I'd be surprised if you didn't strip something out, if you were tightening it or loosening it, and you had it in there cocked or whatever. So keep that in mind. And you know, I like these because I like the bigger handle, and it just, I like the way it feels when I'm torquing on stuff, and it gives me a good feel. But like I said, for a lot of stuff, when I'm tightening it down, you know, tight, or I'm loosening from tight, I'll just use this because it seats in that hex head a lot better. So it's a 3mm Allen key, and it just fits right into the bolt like that. All you got to do, just like any screw, is turn it counterclockwise, and it'll thread right out of there. Once you get it loose, you should be able to just thread it all the way out by hand, and that'll just come all the way up and out. And like I said, that's just the bolt handle, and it's threaded on the end. It's hex keyed in the middle with a 3mm hex key, and that's it. It's just basically like the handle itself is the screw, and that's how it gets held into the bolt. So we'll take the bolt handle off and set it to the side. So now the next thing we've got to do is we've got to punch these pins out of the block that hold the rear trigger assembly in place. So I like to use something like this. You know, any kind of foam block or anything, it just works well. You don't have to, but it works well, because then I can elevate the gun up off the table just a bit, and when I'm pounding through, you know, obviously we've got to have clearance underneath it. If you've got the breech block up against something hard and you're trying to pound them out, they're just going to hit whatever's under there, and you ain't going to be able to get them out. So I like to use this and put this up under the breech block when I'm tapping out them pins, and then once they go all the way through and they're out, they'll just be stuck down in this foam, and I can just pluck them right out of there. So that's the next thing we're going to do, is we are going to punch these pins out. And like I said, they go in, they're directional. They go in this way on the worded side of the gun. They go in that direction. So when you pound them out, you've got to flip it over, and you've got to reverse them and pound them out backwards. So I'm going to station this thing right up on top of this foam. I'm going to take my little lightweight hammer and my pin punch, and we're going to punch these things right up on out of here. Now, you don't have to crack on this thing, you know. I mean, they should just tap right out, you know. Just tap, 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 and they'll come out. And same thing when you're putting them in. You know, if you're having to smack on them hard and it's not moving, then something's not lined up right, or it ain't right, because they should just tap in and out pretty freely. So, now both of the pins came through, and they're out. Whoops. So now both of my pins are just stuck down in this foam block, and I can just pull them out and get them into my tray, and now I don't really need this anymore. So now that we've got them two pins out, this rear trigger assembly can slide right up on and out of there. So if you look, it's just loose. It just comes right out, just like that. Now, the way that this linkage is, it's threaded into this plastic piece here that attaches to the trigger assembly, and it's also threaded into this little, you know, metal bushing here that's attached to the trigger blade. So, the way that that is, and it's all positioned and threaded, is set up just right, so that there's enough distance and everything's lined up right. So when you take this thing out, I would say don't even screw it out of this plastic piece back here. Just unscrew it out of this bushing. And I think, you know, this plastic hole they threaded into is a little undersized, so it's really tied up in there. It won't just spin freely, but it will break free and turn out real loose from here, from this bushing type deal that's threaded and attached to the back of the trigger blade here. So keep in mind how many turns it takes in order to get those threads all the way out of there. Mine, it takes 16 full revolutions, and then it's out. So when I put it back in, I make sure that I start it out threaded in the same position, and I turn it in 16 times, and then I know that when I put it in and line up my holes and punch my pins through, everything is right, you know, nothing's off. If you thread it in a few turns too far, or a few turns not far enough or something, you can still get it up in here, you know, because the way that this rocks on this, you know, the way that it's mounted. So you can still line up your holes and get them pins in, but then you'll find when you go to slipping it in the stock that the trigger is positioned wrong, you know, and it won't either, it'll be too far back and it'll rub a little, you'll notice, but just make sure that you get it in the same amount of turns or whatever. So anyways, I'm not going to count because like I said, I've already counted and I know that mine is 16 turns. So I'm just going to thread this thing on up out of here. And there you go. I'm going to set it over here in my little tray. And now this right here is a mounting post. So the flat face of this seats down in the stock up against the bottom of the stock, and that's where the rear screw goes into. So this thing protruding here is no more than a mounting post for the rear stock screw to hold the gun into the wooden stock. So now we have our bolt handle off, and we've removed the rear trigger assembly that contains our sear and our trigger lever, our hammer lever that grabs our hammer. And we also removed it with the linkage from here. And so now what we need to do next is we need to remove the end cap. There's an end cap in the back of here, and essentially the way that everything is set up, once this end cap is all out and you have removed it, all of this comes out. The pellet probe comes out, the bolt comes out, and the hammer comes out beneath it. And they're all kind of interconnected with a metal post. I'll show you that in a second. But anyways, the way that this cap is back here, this slotted cap, it also allows you to preload some tension onto the hammer spring from the rear. Because it's a threaded cap, it can only be protruding so far from the back here, or you won't get it to fit down into the stock. It'll be sticking out too far and it'll rub the back of the stock. So there's a limit to how far it can be set, you know, cranked in the out direction, but also it can be threaded inwards. And when you're threading it in, you're putting more and more and more tension onto the hammer spring. You're preloading it with some tension. So based on where this is set in here is a preload to how much tension is on the hammer spring. So you want to pay mind to how many, just like when you took off that trigger assembly, you want to pay mind to how many revolutions it takes to get this end cap out, and then you want to put it back in that same many revolutions so you can still maintain your same tune. As long as you get this end cap back in the same exact spot that it was in, you're going to maintain your same tune. Nothing's going to change there because you're going to have the same exact tension on your hammer preloaded, and you know, nothing will change with your tune. So you can open this up, take all this out, clean your action, pop it back in, and you haven't changed your tune at all. You don't even have to check it. You can, and you'll see that it didn't change at all. Unless the gun was really mucked up in here, then obviously once you clean it, that's going to free things up and give you a smoother hammer strike, you know, and stuff like that. So you might get some changes like that, but otherwise your tune itself and the amount of tension on your hammer spring is not going to change at all, as long as you put this end cap back in to the same position it was, because it'll thread quite a bit in past, you know, flush with the rear. It'll go quite a bit in until you bottom out and you can't turn it no more, and you've maxed out the threads. But like I said, it's going to put a different amount of preload tension on your hammer spring. So if you want to maintain your same tune, pay mind to where it's at, and then, you know, turn it back in and set it down with the set screw right to where you had it. So that leads me to my next point here. What holds this end cap in place, there's a little 2mm set screw back here, just a little grub screw that holds it in. And you don't have to take it and turn it all the way out and remove it from the breech block. You just got to turn it out a couple times and back it up and away from the threads of the end cap back here, so that the end cap threads can spin freely. Now keep in mind also that that set screw butts right up against those threads. So when you tighten it down, it does you know, put that point into the threads, and it might cause a little bit of a burr or a little, you know, jag in the threads. And then when you first start to turning it and stuff, you notice a rough spot, and you know, that'll work its way out after you spin it a couple times. And that's what that's from, just from that set screw digging in on them threads a little bit. So like I said, it's a 2mm Allen key grub set screw. So you want to loosen that. So I'm going to take my 2mm Allen key, and like I said, I'm just going to turn it out a couple turns, and that's all it takes. And now it's protruding from the breech block, and I have disengaged it from the threads of the end cap. So now the end cap can spin freely. So now we got that 2mm set screw loosened. Now we can take our end cap out. And the way that you're going to do that, you could use a big flat bladed screwdriver, you know, or whatever works for you. But what I found that works perfectly, you know, and it even gives you real good leverage for turning it in, is a quarter. It fits right into the slot nice, and it just works great. So I use a quarter. So we got that 2mm set screw loosened up. So now we can take our quarter and get it right into the slot of that end cap, and we can start turning it counterclockwise and threading it out. And once you turn it enough and get it all the way threaded out, everything inside of there can come loose. And the way it is, it's got a channel milled into it on the top and on the bottom. So there's a break in the threads on both sides, you know, where that channel is. So it does catch a little in there, and you kind of got to wiggle it and stuff, you know. And that's just because of those channels in there, that break in the threads. And it is fine threaded, and it does, you know, it's got probably 3/4 of an inch of threads on it. So it does seat itself in there pretty far, and it is several turns to get it actually all the way out. All right, now I've got it far enough out and loose enough out, I don't need the quarter no more. I can just turn it this little extra bit with my hands. But if you look here, once I get them threads all the way turned and loose, this end cap will just come right up out of here. See that? So now this end cap came out. And the hammer spring seats right down inside of this end cap. So this end cap actually seats right up against the hammer spring, and that's where the hammer spring seats in there. And that's why, depending on how far this is threaded in or out, it's going to preload a different amount of tension onto your hammer spring. So we got our end cap out, and if you look closely at it, you can see that there's a channel on the top and on the bottom. There's a groove milled into it. It's not a completely round circle. And the reason for that is, when you screw it in, you have to have one of these grooves facing up, because the anti-bounce lever, which I'll show you in a second, that's on the back of the bolt, it has to clear that. So if you put this thing in and it's not with one of those milled grooves facing straight up, and there's one on both sides, you know, so it can go this way or a half a turn out. So you're limited when preloading that spring to half turns because of that groove. You know, you can't go a quarter turn or whatever. That groove has to be lined up straight up and down in order for that anti-bounce lever to clear when you're cocking the gun. And you'll see that when you're taking it out and putting it in. Once you get the gun out of the stock, just look at it from the rear and cock the gun, and you can actually see that anti-bounce lever come back and up and right into that little slot of the end cap. And then you'll understand why it needs to be with one of those grooves facing up. So I'm going to put my end cap over here in my little tray. And now that we've got that end cap out, there's nothing holding any of this in here. So all you have to do is tip the gun. It'll all come out. So put your palm out towards the back of the gun here like this and just give it a tip. Now you can see I've got part of it out there. And I can just take my hammer spring and take it right up on out of there. And the hammer spring, here, let me slide the rest of this out of here. So like I said, you just give it a tip and this stuff starts showing itself out the back. And when you grab it, try to grab all three pieces and hold them all together, because that's the same way when you put it back in. You're going to need to hold them all together. You can't put one in at a time. They've got to go in together, because there's a metal rod that goes through the bolt and also catches on a groove in the hammer, and it needs to be like that when you cock it and stuff. So there's no way to put the hammer in and then the bolt. It's all got to go in like this. So when you take it out, just hold all three items together like this and just slide it right out of there. And now you can see there's nothing else in there. It's completely empty and it's hollow, and you don't have to worry about anything falling or going flying or anything like that. So I'm going to set it down now. And here I've got the 3 pieces that came out, right? So we got our pellet probe, we got our bolt, and we've got our hammer below that. So here you have it, just like that. Now you can take this return spring right on up off the pellet probe and just set it to the side. And so you can see, I'll try to show you on the camera here. All 3 of these fit in there like this. And you see that post going through the bolt and then hitting on top of the edge of the hammer on the top side. That's fixed into the pellet probe. And that goes through the hammer, and the hammer fits on it like that. And that's what holds the bolt. It goes through the bolt. It's fixed into the pellet probe, and it goes through the bolt. And then, see this groove on the top side of the hammer here? Well, that post, this metal dowel here, sits right on top of the hammer in that groove. And that's how it cocks the gun, because when you pull it back and it reaches and butts up against the back of that groove, now it has to pull it back. So, I'm going to take the pellet probe off of here, and all of these pieces are just, you know, it doesn't matter. Don't worry about, nothing's going to come off them. You're not going to lose anything. You're not going to, you know, get confused and put it back together wrong. It's only going to go together one way. It's only going to work one way. And like I said, you can just reference the video or your diagram or whatever, you know. Even just from taking it apart, you should get a visual idea of how it goes back in. And like I said, you can't put it in wrong. So if things aren't lining up, it's not going in, something's not right, you just know you got, something's not right, you know, because it's only going to work one way. So I'm going to set this pellet probe off to the side in my tray, because I want to show you guys a close-up of something here. So here we've got our hammer and our bolt above it. Now, this is the anti-bounce lever. It's spring-loaded and it's in this position, but it actually will move upwards, you know, and it's spring-loaded, so it bounces right back down. And what this does is, when you cock the gun and you pull it back, and then the hammer goes back slightly, and then you pull the bolt forward, it goes just like this into that slot, and it comes up like this, and it's on top of the hammer. So then it's riding like this, and it's on the hammer. So then, and it actually would be about right there. So then when the hammer fires, the hammer goes forward, it releases, it goes forward, it strikes the valve, and it tries to bounce back, and it hits this anti-bounce lever. So this, in essence, is the anti-bounce system on the HATSAN gun, on the Flashpup. This is how it's set up. This lever, when the hammer flies forward and strikes the valve, and that energy is transferred to the valve and pushes it open, it's also transferred back into the hammer, and the hammer wants to fly backwards the opposite direction that it came, right? So this lever stops it. It immediately slams into this lever, and it catches on the back of the hammer, and it doesn't allow it to move. And that's also the same thing if you're sitting there, like say your gun isn't cocked and you were to drop it or something. This lever is holding the hammer in place up against the valve. It's not going to let a jolt or you knocking it or something overcome the tension in the hammer spring and let it back up off of there and smack into the valve. So this lever has a couple functions, and it's good. It's a good thing. I'm not going to say anything negative about it, but it does cause some violence within the action that I think if it wasn't there, the gun would in fact be more accurate. But I could be wrong about that. But when that hammer smacks that valve and comes back and then cracks into this anti-bounce lever, and all that energy comes to a screeching halt, you know, that's where some of that recoil is coming from, in that violence in the action. But anyhow, so we got all our pieces out, right? So the first thing, and like I said, nothing else is in here. So the first thing I did when I got it is I opened it up, and you know, they had what appeared to be some dry graphite as some lube around the hammer and on the bolt and stuff. But then there was also some oil and grease in certain spots, and especially on the pellet probe. And I don't like any type of oils or grease in the action whatsoever. I've found that it just attracts dust. It clings and holds on to every particulate matter that even makes its way close to the action, you know, and it just gets dirty faster. It gets gummed up after a while. And so I found that the best way to accomplish consistent hammer strikes and keep everything as clean as possible and functioning tip-top in here is to use a completely dry, no oils, no grease of any kind. And there's no rubber or seals in here that even require any, so you don't have to worry about that. If you were to use, say, some kind of an oil, a silicone oil or something, and get all this stuff oiled up real nice because you feel like the action is working smoother or whatever, you're going to find that if you ever open this thing up again after a while, it's going to be gummed up. It just will. It will attract and hold on to every particulate matter, be it dust, sand, you know, anything that just makes its way into the air and can find its way into this little slot and get in there. It's going to hold on to it, and it's really going to gum things up. Not only that, I live in Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, we have very hot summer, and then we can have potentially a very cold winter. So what happens to oils and greases when they're exposed from room or normal temperatures to colder temperatures? The viscosity changes, they get thicker, and the lubricity changes, and things are going to be slower in here. So I found that your tune will totally change, and you're going to find that nothing is on in the same if you use oils or grease and take your gun out into a colder climate. So that's another reason why I use a dry lubrication for my action in the gun, and especially in and around the hammer. So you want to make sure that it's clean in here. Now, I did some mild deburring up inside of the breech block and stuff in some different spots. It wasn't completely necessary, but there was just a couple sharp edges and things that I felt would do better if they were knocked down just a little bit and a little smoother. I haven't done any polishing of anything, of my trigger sear or the hammer or any of that stuff. Everything in my gun is stock, and it's performing the way that it is with everything stock. I haven't drilled out any of my ports or anything like that, so I just thought that was worth a mention. But anyhow, you also want to make sure that things are clean in here. You know, so take your cleaning rod or whatever you got, you know, and put a swab on it and get in there and spin it around, get everything cleaned, you know, stuff like that, because there's no point in cleaning up the action, the components of the action, if you're just going to put them back into the breech block and it's all, you know, trashed up in here and dirty anyhow. So you got to clean it in here too. And I'm not going to go through that because like I said, just get something in there, clean it. Just before you go to reassembling, you want to make sure that you haven't any fuzz or dust or whatever you were using to clean up in there is catching on burrs and leaving little hairs and fuzz in there. You want to get that out. And so that's one good thing about having some air on hand. But if you don't, you know, you could use a vacuum or whatever, you know, whatever it takes. Just make sure that you're putting everything back together with the inside of your block nice and clean. So what I do is I just blow it out a little bit. And like I said, if it's dirty, and like that first time I was trying to get them oils and that manufacturing oil and stuff out of there, so then I did use like a cloth and stuff. But right now I know that it's clean, so I'm just going to blow it out a little bit. Alright, so now that's cleaned out inside of there. We know that this is clean and it's not going to get dirty. Now, these blue shop tiles, you can find these anywhere, like an auto parts store, you know, anywhere, a Walmart, you know, Farm and Barn, whatever you got by you, you know, if they sell a hardware store type crap, you can find these. And these are great because they're very lint free, you know, they don't have a lot of linty, fuzzy type stuff that can get onto the parts of your gun. So I like these a lot when I'm working on my guns. Because if I clean some parts or something and I want to set them down somewhere and have them not be attracting stuff, this is a really nice clean surface to do that. So I'm just going to take and simulate what you would do here. But you know, you're just going to wipe all this crap down, you know, get it really cleaned off and get your pellet probe cleaned up, wipe down your springs, you know, get them so they're not having any dust or dirt or stuff on them, you know, your hammer spring and the return spring that goes onto your pellet probe. And you're just going to clean all this stuff up. Just get it wiped down real good. And you might have noticed in the close-up shot that there, you know, you might have thought, what's all that crap all over his hammer? You know, what is the finish on that thing all crazy, or what is that? That was just my lubrication. That was just dry graphite and stuff like that around the hammer. So you can get your hammer wiped off. And like I said, if you got air, it's really great. You can just blow things off and out and get them cleaned up that way. And you're also going to find, as you break the gun in and use it, that some of those sharp surfaces inside the breech block, like I said, I did do a little mild deburring, because some of those are so sharp and the surfaces are so, you know, pointed at 90s and stuff, that it's almost inevitable that it get knocked over a little bit, and eventually burrs get knocked over and rubbed on and worn, and they come loose. And now you're going to have little tiny pieces of metal in the action of your air rifle, which is the worst thing that you could have. So also another great reason to be able to open up your gun and clean this stuff and maintain just a really nice clean environment for everything in there, and also ensuring you know, real consistent hammer strikes and stuff like that. You don't want your hammer striking different, or you know, it gets hung up one time then it doesn't, you know, stuff like that. So dirt, dust, all that kind of crap can definitely affect the tune of your gun and the efficiency of your gun and everything. So it's a really great idea to do stuff like this. So now I've got all the components cleaned and ready to go, and so I'm just going to set them back in my tray, which is clean and doesn't have any dust or anything weird in it. And now I'm going to show you how I lubricate it. Now I keep everything on here free of oil or grease or anything, aside from in one spot. I apply just a little bit of silicone grease to the bottom of this metal post that's fixed into the pellet probe. And the reason for that is because it rides right in this slot on top of the hammer. And I just like to have, and I'm talking just a dab, you know, the thinnest little shimmer of it on there, because I don't want excess. I don't want it gumming up. I don't want it attracting dust and dirt and things like that. If anything, the only thing I want attracting to it is my dry graphite lube, which is actually going to just mix in with that little shimmer of grease on there, and it's just going to allow it to ride better and even more free. So I take my hammer, and the slotted side of your hammer is the top side, the long groove that runs the long ways on it, and in the bottom you just have this little channel milled into here, this little groove. And that's just there so that the lever inside your trigger assembly, it grabs onto your hammer here on the bottom to hold it in place. And then when you pull the trigger and that sear lets it go, it comes loose and the hammer can go forward. So you always know very easily, you know, this can only go in one way. So what I do is I set it down with the bottom facing down, or I mean with the top facing down. So I want the bottom side up and the sides up, right? And then I take some dry graphite lube that's in a spray form like this. And you want to make sure you shake it up real good and get that powder mixed up real good, you know, with the carrier that's in here. Now, something else I'll mention. The carrier that's used, you know, the gas that's in here that's used to carry this and spray out the graphite powder is a petroleum distillate. So you don't ever want to take this and spray it into the action of the gun, or you know, directly into there, because before those petroleum distillates can evaporate, they could do some damage, you know, and they're just no good. You know, they attack plastics and rubber, your rubber seals, and you know, they'll attack the wood of your stock. So I don't do any of that. I don't spray anything like this directly into my gun. Even if I was to use ballistol to clean my barrel, I don't even use the spray kind for that, you know, and if I did, I would let it sit out and evaporate, because if you just spray it on and drag it through the barrel, all those petroleum distillates, that carrier hasn't evaporated yet, and you're dragging it right over top of your breech seal and getting it on and around the breech seal and on that rubber, and it's just going to sit on there and do some damage, you know. That's the opposite of what you want to do. So I only spray it onto the hammer, and I do that only as a form of, because when it's wet then, that carrier, it's wet, then I can use this stuff here. And this is just a powder form, dry graphite, come in a little tube. You can find it at any hardware store. You know, sometimes it's by the keys, things like that. And it just works great. It also, you know, the inside of the breech block of the Flashpup, the channel that the hammer rides in when it's going to strike the valve, it's not polished or anything like that. The hammer is not severely polished, you know, which is fine. I'm not knocking it or saying anything negative, but that's also something I've found in a gun like this. It works exceptionally well using a dry graphite, because what it does is it works its way. If there's any tooling marks in there, any little grooves, any uneven surfaces, this dry graphite is going to seat itself into there and stay there, you know, and create a smoother surface for the hammer to travel through. You know, if there's any grooves or inconsistencies or tooling marks on your hammer, you know, of course, unless you polish this stuff up, then it's not really going to matter to this effect. But it'll fill in those spots and just offer a more smoother surface, and it'll stay consistent too, because it's not wet with oil. It's not going to attract or hold any dust or dirt and muck up or anything like that. It doesn't change from a warm temperature to a cold temperature. It doesn't change its viscosity and its lubricity for the parts and stuff like that. So like I said, I never spray this directly into the action of the gun. I just spray it onto the hammer, and then I real quick go and get some of a couple shots of this onto there, and then this stuff will just stick real well onto the hammer, which is what I want, because on a dry surface this stuff will just kind of fall and just dust itself right off of there, and then it's going to be ineffective because it's not going to be in there. And one thing I will do is occasionally just stick the tip of this into the action, and maybe just you know, just a tiny bit along the hammer and along the rear of the hammer and stuff like that, or maybe just I'll shoot just a hit of it, you know, right up along the bolt or whatever, you know, and all that comes down and works its way around the hammer and everything, and then helps to maintain that lube that you've done with your dry stuff. So like I say, you shake this stuff up. Well, there goes that. And anyways, you know, I don't mean to be so long-winded about all this stuff, and I do understand that some of you guys may have done some of this stuff before, and you just want to see how this gun's opened up or whatever. But I want to do this in consideration for everybody, you know, for the first-timer and the new guy, you know, that had a lot of apprehensions about something like this. You know, I want them to feel more comfortable and really get to knowing exactly what's going on. So excuse me if it seems like I'm rambling or talking too in depth about stuff or being too descriptive. That's the reason why. That's for you new guys, you know, because everybody started off at one point in time and didn't know anything, you know, and that's a tough place to come from if you just get in there with a room full of vets. You know, you might just kind of be like, what the hell are these guys talking about, you know? So anyways, that's why I'm rambling on a lot. I'm just trying to really break it down so you guys can understand. So anyways, I take this dry spray, shake it up, and spray it onto the sides. I just hit it with some shots, you know, along the sides and along the top of the hammer. And it just takes a quick little shot, you know, just a thin coating and film. And then I take this and hit it with some shots of this. And now because it's wet still and that carrier hasn't evaporated, this dry graphite in this tube will actually stick and cling to the hammer. So you can just squeeze it, you know, it kind of just poofs out when you give these tubes a squeeze. And you just kind of feed it onto there and sprinkle it all over, you know. It'll stick onto the sides and bottom of the hammer, which is where the hammer is going to make the most contact inside the breech block, is along the sides and the bottom as it's riding through that channel, striking onto the valve. So let me close this up here. And then what I'll do is I'll just take the hammer and I'll wipe the head of it off and get any excess off the head of it, because that head is undersized from the diameter of the rest of the hammer, and the head of it here, it doesn't make any contact when it's traveling anyways. Just the outer diameter, the larger diameter, makes contact with the sides of the breech block and stuff. So I'll just wipe off the head of it, because there's no reason to have an excess of it on the head and getting onto the valve pin and stuff like that. And then I'll just kind of give it a knock. And I'll just knock off like that excess that was on there, you know. So that's it. Everything's cleaned up. I got this thing lubed up, ready to rock and roll. So all you're going to do is just position all this stuff same way how you took it out. You know, you're going to line all this stuff up together. Like I said, if you can learn, you know, this lever goes on the back. You know, it's only going to fit one way anyhow. So you're not going to have too hard of a time getting this back together. But like I said, when I took it out, if you can do that again and recreate that and kind of hold all three of these together at once, you can slip this through and now it's onto your bolt, and then you just kind of set it up onto this channel here and just hold all three of them together like that. And don't forget, you want to get this return spring up and over onto the pellet probe here. So now that you got everything all held together like that, that's all you're going to do is just put it back in the same way it came out. Start with the pellet probe and feed it in. Just kind of jiggle and wiggle everything and line it up till it's lined up like that. And as simple as tipping the gun, and it's all going to go right in there. Now, you don't have to do it like that. I just wanted to show you. It just falls right into there. There's no special particular way. It just shouldn't bind at all or anything funky. And as long as all them three pieces, you're holding them together the way that they go, it should just slip and fall right up on into there. And I'm not going to talk about hammer adjustment or any of that right now, because I'm going to do specifically a tuning video and show you how to adjust the hammer spring tension and stuff like that. So I'm not even going to brush up on that. But there is also inside the hammer, there is a screw in there where the hammer spring slips into the hammer and it seats up against that screw. That screw can be turned in or out. So if you turn it out, you compress that spring and add more tension to it. And if you turn that screw into the hammer, you take tension off of the spring. So that's essentially is how you tune the gun, but we'll cover that in the tuning video. So now, I've got everything slid on up into here, and I dropped my hammer spring in. Now, here's something to consider. You want to make sure that when you put this end cap back on here, that you get the hammer spring seated into this hole, you know, this where it seats. You don't want to make sure it's not caught on the edge and binding up or anything. So when you first start to screw it in, you're going to kind of have to, you know, just get it threaded nice and get it going, you know. But then you're going to want to keep an eye on it. You know, you can look right down into here, into the breech block, and you can see if it's in there or not. And if you just take anything, you can even take the bolt handle or whatever and just kind of manipulate the spring and move it so that it pops its place into that end cap, and just make sure that it's seated into the end cap properly and that it's not caught up on the sides or the edge or anything. So now, and I try not to ever set the gun down like this because I don't want to put any stress on the trigger blade at all. So I'm going to put it upside down like this and rest it onto the optics rail. And I'm going to get rid of this towel with our dry lube on it. So now, and you're going to see when you handle your gun, your fingerprints and stuff are just going to make it look like crap, you know. So before I put it back into the stock, I will carefully wipe it all down, you know, with a nice little polishing rag or something, you know, and get it cleaned up nice so that it's not having the oils from my skin on it and everywhere and fingerprints everywhere. But anyway, so we slipped everything in and we started threading our end cap back in, and we made sure that our spring was seated properly into the seat where it goes in our end cap. So I'm going to screw the end cap in as far as I can get it by hand, and then I'm going to use my quarter because it'll get up in there just a little too far where I can't get a hold of it. So now I'm going to take my quarter and just screw the end cap back in. And like I said, you can count the revolutions, you can mark it, you can visually look and see, you know, where it is, if it's flushed off with the rear of the breech block, whatever it is. But if you want to maintain your same tune and have the same hammer strike going on as you had before you did this, you're going to make sure that you preload the spring with this rear end cap the same as it was before, or it's not going to be the same. So I'm going to turn this in now, and one more turn here, and I'll be where I need to be. Now, like I said, that channel in the top of the end cap, that channel's got to be facing upwards so that when you cock the gun and you bring that bolt back, that anti-bounce lever can clear and go into that groove. So you just got to look when you're screwing it in and just visually line it up, you know. Get it lined up so that it's right and the groove is lined up right. And just, you know, just visually, there's no perfect spot, you know, but just make sure that it's lined up and that groove is facing upwards and on the top so that that can clear when you're cocking the gun. So now that I've got the end cap screwed in and it's into position and it's lined up correctly for that anti-bounce lever, now I can take my 2mm Allen and tighten back this set screw. And the set screw that goes into this end cap and holds it in place, like I said, it kisses right up against the threads of the end cap. When you're tightening this down, all you have to do is get it up to where you feel it touch and give it like another 1/16 of a turn or something, you know, just a tiny little crank. You just want to snug it up against the threads. If you kept on cranking and you tighten it down, this breech block is aluminum. And with these slots, you know, milled out of it, it's thin. It'll bend easy. This end cap is steel and that grub screw is steel. So what's going to give? Either the threads inside the breech block, or it's just going to keep going deeper and deeper, and it's going to actually bend the aluminum and spread open that breech block on the bottom because it's slotted and open here. So take care and caution and keep that in mind. Get it up where you feel it touch and just give it a little snug, and that's all it takes. So I'm going to tighten down this 2mm set screw here in the back. Like I said, kiss it up against the threads, give it a little extra, you know, snug down, and you're good to go. It doesn't take much anyways. The only thing that's going to cause this to loosen, you know, could be the vibrations of the gun, the recoil, and the violence in here. But with this screw, even that set screw, even just barely against them threads, it's an immense amount of tension against it. So just don't over tighten it. It only takes a firm snug down, and that's it. So now we got everything in. We got our end cap back on. We got our 2mm set screw that holds the end cap in place, tightened back down. Now we can put our bolt handle back on if we want to. You don't have to do it now. You could put the trigger assembly back on and stuff, but I'm just going to go ahead and put the bolt handle back on. So just line it up with the hole and screw it back in by hand. Get it down as tight as you can get it by hand. And then take your 3mm Allen, stick it down in there, and just torque it down. Again, it doesn't need to be any more than just snugly, you know, firmly tightened down. Once you feel it snug, a little extra crank and you're good. Don't get to going past there. You're going to regret it, trust me. So I snugged it down, a little tiny extra crank, and it's good to go. So now we've got everything back inside of here. Our bolt handle is reattached. I can even put it down into its levered position there, fix it in. Now all we've got left to do is put the trigger assembly back on. So like I said, mine took 16 revolutions to get back to right so that it was in the proper spot. So keep that in mind, or if you don't keep it in mind and you just go screwing this in and put it back together, you're going to find that you're going to have to monkey with it and make some adjustments, and things aren't going to be lined up right. So just keep that in mind and screw it back into the right spot. And like I said, 16 revolutions around, and mine's right back where it was in the spot that it came out of. And it'll just slip right back down into the block here. Slip it over the mounting post. Make sure that you don't catching this on there or whatever. It'll just slip right back over. Get it down in there. And now you don't need foam or nothing under here because we're just pounding them back in the way they came out. So you can lay it down on a flat surface or whatever. And then what you've got to do though is look at it and line up them holes. And once you get them holes lined up, you can take your 2 pins, and obviously the tapered end is the tip. The tapered end is the tip, and it goes in that direction first. So you can go and slip it in, and I can just push it in by hand most of the way. And then we'll do the second one. Might have to wiggle things around a little, line it up. But now I got that in there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my pin punch that I used to drive them out in reverse, and I'm going to flip it over. And I'm going to use the handle side of it, the butt side of it, to put them back in. And the reason for that is because I just want to flush them off. I want to make sure that I don't pound them in any further than they need to be. So I'm not going to use this little point. I'm going to use the butt of this thing, which is going to kiss up against the breech block, and then they can't go any further. And like I said, just a couple taps, and they should go right back in nice. And flush them off just like that. And it just takes tapping. You should never have to crack on it or nothing like that. If you do, something can't possibly be right in there, and you should take a step back and examine what's going on, because something's not lined up or something. Alright, so now we got everything back together. We got all the components back inside, the pellet probe, the bolt lever, all that stuff is attached. The end cap holding the spring is back in its original position, so we didn't lose our tune or change the amount of tension on our hammer spring. We put back on our rear trigger assembly, screwed it right back into the same spot that it was when we took it off, and put our pins back in to hold it in place. And now our maintenance and cleaning of the action is complete. So we can take our stock and put it back into the stock. When you put it in, you're just going to drop it back in the same way that it came out. And it should just freely drop in there. If something, you know, obviously you can't cock it or have it, you know, binding up. But if something's not fitting right, you know, take a step back and look at things. You should never have to force it or have a compressed fit, you know, going down into there. So if you do, or if something's dragging, you might not have pounded those pins in far enough, and they're not flush with the block. You might have your set screw that holds that end cap in not turned in, you know, so now it's protruding out and it's hanging up in there. Or here's another thing. Like I said, if you set this preload on this hammer spring and you have it not screwed in far enough and it's protruding out from the back of the block here, you can only have it sticking out so far, and when you try to slip it down into the stock, it's going to hit and it's going to grab and drag in there, and you ain't going to be able to just drop it in, and then you know you're too far out. So even when you're tuning the gun, you don't want to have to force it down in there. But what I like to do is have the preload on this set as minimal as possible. So I've got it backed out where it's just barely sticking out the back there. And what that does is it actually just barely makes contact with the stock inside. You know, I can feel it, and I do have to, you know, give it a little bit of a push, you know, but it's not tight. And that, you know, your only contact inside the wooden stock is here and here on this post. So by adding another contact point here, it just seemed to give the gun a more tighter, you know, able to absorb the vibrations and everything when you shoot. So that's just a tip, I guess. That's something I found. If you can cause this end cap to be another contact point inside the stock, it actually will give the gun a little bit better vibration and harmonics, you know, and tighten things up just a little bit. And not only that, if you adjust the preload on this end cap too far in order to gain more tension on your hammer spring, you're going to see, even in a video I saw, a guy was like, yeah, you know, I turned out the screw, you know, and put it way out, and I couldn't even cock the gun. It wouldn't even go all the way back into the cock position. And if you want to shoot your gun hot and tune it hot, you want to have this preloaded end cap out and back as far as you can, because it's just going to give more clearance. You know, this is a fixed position here. The travel in here is fixed. That can't move. You might be able to move that end cap and change the position of it, but the travel of everything in here and this slot where your bolt cocks, none of that moves. So in order to ease that cocking pressure and allow you that full, you know, cock all the way back without, you know, much of resistance or none, put this end cap. Just try it. Bring your hammer spring out further and put less preload on with this. Back that out, and you might find that you can still achieve the same velocities by bringing that hammer screw out more and actually decreasing, you know, so you're going to increase the tension on the spring inside the hammer there, but actually decrease the preload on the back of it. And that's going to allow you more travel when you're cocking the gun, and it's not going to be as hard and tough and rough at that back, you know, that back little finish, you know, that back little bit where the sear grabs and stuff. And you can actually get a hotter tune and more tension on the hammer spring with the screw that's in there, as long as you back this out as far as you can. Otherwise, you will in fact reach a point where there's too much tension on the spring, and it because of that travel, and you've brought the back end up so far, you just can't cock it enough. You know, you can't bring it back enough. It's bunching up the spring too much. So you might be able to bunch up the spring that much and still achieve those velocities, but you've got to have it happening up here. You can't bring the rear and the end cap way up, and then it's really crunching on that spring. So just another thing to keep in mind, and you know, I was going to talk about that in the tuning video, but anyways, there you have it. So the gun is just going to slip right down into the stock, just like that. You know, make sure you don't bind it up or anything, you know, have it in there weird. Oh, and now, see, I forgot. You've got to take this little nut, and you got to get this nut back into this trigger blade assembly here, because that's the nut that the front stock screw secures into. So once you got that slipped into there, you're ready to rock and roll. But if you're turning and turning that screw and nothing's happening, that's why, because you forgot to put that nut in there. So I'm gonna hold it together, flip it upside down, and that allows, you know, when you flip it upside down like this too and rest it on the optics rail, it allows the stock to just freely, you know, rest in position on top of the gun without any external stresses or, you know, directional stresses when you're trying to put it in and tighten down the screw. So I'll take the front screw and just drop it down on in. Take the back screw. I'm going to thread the back screw in by hand as far as I can get it. And then I'm going to take my number 2 Phillips and tighten it down the rest of the way. And what I do is I just kind of crank it down. I give it a couple tightens down, you know, just to kind of line it up if it's not, you know, just lined up right, because you don't want it to be off a little and then you crank it down tight, you know. So if you just, with a lot of this stuff, when you're setting your barrel, when you're setting your air tank, you know, it's a good technique. You can bring that screw in, back it off, bring it in, and it just kind of helps to wiggle and line up things into place. So again, with these stock screws, this rear screw is going into that metal mounting post. So I would imagine you can just snug it down tight. You know, you don't have to reef it. But especially on this front screw, take caution with how tight you put it. Because like I said, that nut is just inside of that plastic trigger assembly. So that's plastic. And your nut is steel, and your stock is hardwood. You know, the screw is steel. You don't want to pull too hard on it when you're tightening it down and be flexing the crap out of that plastic, you know, and putting too much tension in there. So again, the same with the front one, you know, just get it snug down, and then give it that little extra crank, you know, just that little extra tightness, you know. Like right now, it's snug, and I'm just going to give it that extra. That was a weird noise, wasn't it? So there you go. We got it all back together. It's back in the stock, and it's ready to rock and roll. There you go. Should be same tune and everything, like I said, long as you got that preload end cap in the same spot. And let me know, you know, if you guys try out, you know, the Graphite, the dry lube. Like I said, I've had a lot of trial and error, and it's just what I've found to work the best as far as an all-season lube, and just for the most consistent, cleanest hammer strikes that I've been able to obtain, you know, has come from a dry Graphite lube. So let me know if you try it, how it works for you. And if you got a better idea, or you do something and you think it works better, then I want to know about it. You know, I'm always open to, anything, you know, I want to do what works best, you know, and then I want to share that with others. That's my goal. So if you know something that works better, jump on off into the comments, you know, and let's talk about it, you know, let's share it and let's get it out there so other people can use that information, because that's what Brothers in Air is all about. So we can just all, you know, have a better experience with our guns, shoot better, you know, and that's it, man. That's what it's about. So I hope that this was a helpful video for you guys. I hope that we, you know, covered the action enough for you to really understand what's going on in there. Like I said, download your exploded parts view so you can really study up on the parts and what's going on in there even before you tear into your gun. And like I said, always remember to be safe. Always, always, always be safe, and keep your safety and other safety in mind first and foremost. And then second, always think about what you're doing and don't screw up your gun, especially doing something stupid, you know. Just really think about what you're doing, take your time. And if you don't know, ask somebody. If you don't know, do the research. Don't just start experimenting with your PCPs unless you're prepared to assume the risk. You know, you might end up with somewhat of a Frankenstein when you're done. You know, if you just get to drilling ports and going crazy, you know, just do the research on whatever it is that you're doing so that you have a goal in mind, and then you just take steps along the way to try to reach that goal. Don't just ever dive in and say, well, I'm going to see if this works and start, you know, it's just silly. So I hope this was helpful. Like I said, I don't know everything about PCP air guns. I am not an expert, but I do work on and fix my own guns, and I think that this information could be helpful for others, and that's my intention. So have a good night, well, a good day, actually. It's early in the morning now, but you guys have a good one. Happy shooting. I'm going to finish off my coffee and sit down and get to editing this thing, and hopefully next we can get a tuning video out right away, and you guys can get to cranking on your hammer spring and you know, reaching your desired tunes and stuff like that, you know, for you guys that didn't know how to do that already. So I'll be bringing that to you next, and like I said, I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and happy shooting. See you next time.